distinguished speaker, Professor Radha Vallabh Tripathi ji, who is the Carnatic Chair of Orientology, Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, Pune, Dr. Geetesh, co-convener of the webinar series. Dear viewers, interested in Mahabharata scholarship, I welcome you all to our webinar series on Mahabharata, initiated under the project Yoga Consciousness in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, the ethical value of societal and political well-being, which is taken up under the scheme for promotion of academic research and collaboration of Ministry of Human Resource Development. Now it is transformed into Ministry of Education, of course, and Government of India. Our team includes Professor Vishwa Adluri, Professor of Philosophy, Hunter College, USA, Dr. Joydeep Bagchi, Hindu University of America, USA, Dr. Geetesh Nirban, Kamala Nehru College, Delhi University, Delhi, and me, Professor Bala, Head Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi. And we are supported by young scholars who have been working in this project. Ms. Jayashree and Ms. Anmol are working as research fellows of the project, and we are supported by Ms. Deepshika and Ms. Megha as a part of our extended team. As I have already mentioned, the title or the theme of the project that we have picked up is Yoga Consciousness in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, the ethical value of societal and political well-being. Uh, we have taken up this project with certain aims and objectives, which I would like to state before we proceed to the lecture of Professor Tripathi. One of the major aims that we have in this project is to build a new approach to yoga that combines theoretical and practical perspectives, and to understand yoga beyond a set of postures as an overarching term for salvic practices, and to see how it is embedded in social and political reality. This aspect is very important to us. We want to see how it is embedded in social and political realities. And we also aim to reappropriate the texts of classical Hinduism, which have suffered from Orientalist approaches, in order to articulate the vision of yoga consciousness. And we aim to demonstrate how answers to question of right action at the societal and political levels can be explored through the conception of yoga consciousness in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita. And we also try to explicate the universal philanthropic and humanitarian aspects of Hinduism as echoed in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita. So to put them together, like there are 3 pointers that we have for the discussion in the project, and which would also be the part of the discussions of the webinar that we have taken up. One of them is yoga consciousness in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita. The other one is ethical values of societal well-being, which is named as Loka Sangraha, and then ethical value of political well-being as well. So if we look at it in a pointed manner, the question that we would be addressing is, what is the right course of action? No, this is very important both in all the contexts of the life, whether it is religious, ethical, social, political. So the pointed question that is how we have is, what is the right course of action? We had lectures on yoga consciousness, we had lectures on social well-being and political well-being as well. Now today we have Professor Radha Vallabh Tripathi ji, who would be talking about concept of dharma in Mahabharata. This concept of dharma, often we hear the saying, dharmo rakshati rakshitaha. No? When it is protected, it protects us. Dharma is something that when we try to protect it, it protects us back. So if that is the case, then what is this dharma? See, you are supposed to protect that so that it protects you. But what is it that we have to understand so that we can try to be part of it, and we can try to protect it? So this question is always intriguing, because whether dharma is a cosmic one, because it has replaced cosmic Rita, which was stressed in Vedic tradition, and whether it is ethical or religious or social or political or all of these. No, this is to be this is a very interesting thing that we have to understand by exploring the text called Mahabharata that we have, and also what is being stressed in it, what is being stressed in the concept dharma that we have for the discussion. Is it the virtue that is being stressed when we talk about dharma, or is it the duty that is stressed when we talk about dharma, or should we consider it to be a contextual one, or should we consider it to be a consequentialist oriented one? All these things are very important when we look at concept of dharma, because these are the varied things that that form the part of the discourse on dharma in Mahabharata. So this shows us that this tells us that dharma is very important and it is to be discussed thoroughly. How important is following dharma? No? If dharma, whether dharma is societal or political or virtuous or deontological, how important it is to follow. If we try to look at the text, it gives a lot of insights on that. But one important thing that comes out in chapter 18, 66 sloka, is finally Krishna, Lord Krishna tells us, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Saranam Vraja. So dharma is stressed so much, and towards the end, what is stated is you leave out all dharmas and mamekam saranam vraja. No, that's very important. So what is it that is being stated in the course of the discussion between Arjuna and Krishna in the process of Bhagavad Gita dialogue is very important to each one of us, so that we can take insights from that and try to look at our own contemporary life, because dharma is also understood to be something that is eternal. Okay, that is that it's not that it is only useful to a particular context or to a particular period of people of particular time. It is understood to be an eternal one, and if that is the case, what is the real meaning of dharma that we should pick up for our daily lives of the contemporary times is very important. And I'm sure Professor Radha Vallabh Tripathi ji would be delving into such kind of concerns that we have, societal and political concerns that we have in understanding concept of dharma. Now, I request Dr. Geetesh to formally introduce Professor Radha Vallabh Tripathi ji and take the proceedings further.
Thank you, Professor Bala. Namaskar. I welcome you all on behalf of the whole team. And we are very honored to have amongst us Professor Radha Vallabh Tripathi ji. Before I go ahead with this formal introduction, I request all of you to switch off your videos and keep the sound muted so that we can have a smooth flow of today's meeting also. I even request all the participants to name their screens so that it is convenient for us to know how many participants are there, who are there. And at the end of the session, I would be requesting you all to switch on your videos so that we can have a group picture. Here on, I go on to introduce Professor Tripathi ji. He is the senior most professors of Sanskrit in the country. He has served as Vice Chancellor of Rashtriya Sanskrit Sansthan, the Dean University at Delhi, for 5 years, spanning from 2008 to 2013. He had been the Vice Chancellor on additional charge at Sri Lal Bahadur Shastri Sanskrit Vidyapeeth for 6 months, and as Vice Chancellor in charge of Dr. H.S. Gaur University on a number of occasions. He worked as a visiting professor at Silpakon University, Bangkok for 3 years. He retired as professor from Dr. Hari Singh Gaur University, Sagar, MP in February 2014. Professor Tripathi has worked as fellow in Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla for a year, 2014 to 15. Presently, he is the Carnatic Chair of Orientology at the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute at Pune. Widely acclaimed for his original contribution to the study of Natya Shastra and Sahitya Shastra, Professor Tripathi has published 175 books, 265 research papers, and critical essays, as well as translations of more than 30 Sanskrit plays and some classics from Sanskrit into Hindi. He has received 37 national and international awards and honors for his literary contributions. Professor Tripathi is a well-known poet, a short story writer, and a playwright of Sanskrit, as well as Hindi. He has been a reviewer associated with various research journals on Indology. He has even visited various institutions abroad at UK, USA, Germany, Holland, Vienna, Nepal, Bhutan, Russia, Iran, and many more countries for delivering lectures, making presentations in conferences, as well as he has been part of various cultural and academic exchange programs. Professor Tripathi has been very kind to have spare time for us to deliver an address on a topic of perennial value, as what Dr. Bala just shared with all of us. And the title is The Concept of Dharma in the Mahabharata. We are very honored to have you amongst us, sir. And now I hand over the proceedings to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Namaskar. I am grateful to the organizers, the Department of Philosophy of Delhi University and the college. And I also convey my thanks to Professor Bala and Dr. Geetesh and all the members of the group. I do not belong to the area of philosophy, as Geetesh ji has told me from my bio. My area of study has been entirely different. And I am rather weak in philosophical analysis. I'm a man of text. I've been a professor of Sanskrit, and I will stick to my premises. So I will be speaking about the treatment of dharma as we find it in the text of Mahabharata. And maybe you will find it a bit relevant for the project that is being conducted by your team. That is yoga consciousness in the Mahabharata and Gita, and their ethical values and societal well-being, as well as political well-being. And we have to devise a right action for the society today through all these deliberations. So maybe the discussions on dharma in the Mahabharata provide a clue to the way we have to go ahead. Both Ramayana and the Mahabharata, both of them are regarded as itihasa in our tradition. And itihasa is something different than history. It covers the concept of history also, but it is something entirely different from the modern concept of history, or in the word history as it is used nowadays in our curricula. So there is a definition of itihasa in the Mahabharata itself, and in other texts also. So itihasa is accordingly not just a documentation of the practices or events that have happened or that have been prevailing, and it is also a record of the future. It gives a perspective to future, and it is unraveling of mysteries of human life, recording whatever is valuable and creating a repository of knowledge systems. That is also itihasa in our tradition. And there is a detailed treatment to the concept of itihasa in Mahabharata itself in Adi Parvan 45th adhyaya. So Sambhuta Bhava Vansha Bhut Sarga Savistara, all these, the cosmology and the how the creation has proceeded, then Veda Yogam Savigyanam Dharmortha Kamayavcha, all the Purusharthas, the values of life, Lokayatra Vidhanam cha, the ways of the people, and all these Vyasa could visualize in the text, and that is what itihasa is. Itihasa Savayakhya. So this is what itihasa is, and Mahabharata is a record of all this. So Purusharthas are very much treated in the Mahabharata, and the concept of dharma is basically the theme of Mahabharata. And as Abhinav Gupta, who is a well-known philosopher in the 11th century, he also discusses the concept of itihasa. So he says that the term iti in itihasa denotes its quality of being perceived, sakshatkara. So you see you visualize the happenings that are before you, what is happening and what is going to happen and what has happened. All this you visualize before your eyes. So pratyakshaya manata, the capability of being visualized. This is the quality or the characteristics of the itihasa. Then Mahabharata is also remembered as an agama in the tradition. So itihasa pradhanartha sarva agame swayam. This is what Mahabharata has been described in the text itself. So it is an agama, it is a record of the knowledge systems that has gone through Guru Shishya Parampara along with the itihasa. So with this concept of itihasa and Mahabharata as an itihasa, we proceed further. We find that Mahabharata is a very stupendous epic, and it has always been attracting the seekers of knowledge, and it has a rich mine of myths and legends and tales and various religious and philosophical discussions also, and discourses on various philosophical issues. There are of course controversies about the purport of the Mahabharata and what Mahabharata deals with. What is this discourse about? And the understanding of Mahabharata has remained fluctuating between opposite polarities. The Indian approach views it as an homogeneous text, and the Western scholarship analyzes it as a heterogeneous mass of compilations and viewing it from psychoanalytic, ethnocentric, and anthropomorphic angles. So if we juxtapose these diverse views, it will yield a picture of opposites brought together. There is a holistic view of the Mahabharata, which is based on faith and tradition, and there are fragmentary views viewing Mahabharata as a assembly of fragmentations. They are based on modern scientific notions. So I will stick to the traditional approach to the Mahabharata, and the tradition views it as a text on dharma. The modern scholarships may view it as a text of genocide ending in hopeless and desperate situation, in barbarism and cruelty, and as an account of erosion of values and failures of men. These are all the words from Winternis and other Western scholars. And in our tradition, it is viewed as a text of compassion, which is named as Anrishansya in the Mahabharata itself. And the dharma is defined as Anrishansya. And it is an epic leading to the experience of harmony and peace. It is a depiction of grandeur and dignity of man. It's a poem of universal wisdom and universal values. Amongst the modern philosophers also, there are scholars who agree with this view and who believe that Mahabharata is a discourse on dharma. I will quote Radhakrishnan. He says, though the Mahabharata describes a society distracted by deceit and intrigue, and though the story is reeking with war and the spirit of war, the author clearly declares himself against the politics of power and looks upon the state not as an organization of force, but as a partnership in dharma. The modern apostles of doctrine that the state is an end in itself, with no higher duty than to maintain itself, will not find support for their views in it. The view that the end of the state is to organize and establish dharma, that its powers are strictly cultivated, that its powers are strictly limited by unalterable laws, which it can only enforce, has a greater appeal to the cultivated consciousness of our times. The author refuses to be stampeded by transient moods and agitations of the time, but approves of the principle that righteousness exalteth a nation, quote unquote. So there is another philosopher who has made studies in the Mahabharata, J.L. Mehta. He says that Mahabharata is an epic of being and becoming. It is also an epic of universal being as Narayana on one hand, and as a poem of becoming of man as well. Or as Vidyanivas Mishra says, it is the ceaseless endeavor of man to be in harmony with fullness of life. So these are the divergent views on the Mahabharata, but we'll take up Mahabharata as a text on dharma or as a discourse on dharma. And as you will perhaps agree, or you will certainly agree, that religion is not the proper word for dharma. Dharma may mean legal duties or social or moral duties, obligations, religious functions, but dharma has a wider connotation, as Professor Bala has pointed out in his introductory remarks, and we will come to that. And Mahabharata says that this text deals with that dharma, and it says that this text has everything about dharma, about the purusharthas, or about the goals of human life. It is said in the Mahabharata itself, dharme cha arthe cha kame cha mokshe cha bharatarshava yadi hasti tadanyatra yanne hasti na tatvachit. So whatever is there in our culture, in the tradition of our country about the values of life, all that is there recorded in the Mahabharata, and what is not there in the Mahabharata may not be elsewhere as well. So Vyasa himself proclaims that I am calling upon the people to know what dharma is and to follow the path of dharma. So this is also the message from Vyasa in the Mahabharata. Urdhva bahur viraumyesha nahi kaschit chanoti mam dharma adarthascha kamascha sa dharma kimna sevyate. Raising both of my hands, I am crying, I am calling upon the people, telling them that you will get everything out of dharma. Arth and kama also you get out of dharma. So why not take recourse to that dharma? So this is the call from the Mahabharata, and the whole tradition of our literary criticism which analyzes Mahabharata as a poetry, but it says that it is a Shastra Kavya. It is a different genre in Kavya, in our Kavya Shastra. So it is a Shastra and Kavya combined. So poetry combined with the philosophical speculations, rich poetry is there in the Mahabharata, and equally great thinking is there also. So I will not go into the details of what Anandavardhana, one of the greatest literary critics in our tradition, a 9th century master of literary criticism in Sanskrit, he has given almost an essay in the last chapter of his Dhanya Loka about Mahabharata and about the message and its Angi Rasa, as Shant Rasa is the Angi Rasa of Mahabharata. He speaks about that. But then, as we have been discussing, that what is dharma? So there is a dharma which embraces the bigger issues of life, which you can say eternal dharma or cosmic dharma, as Professor Bala says. And there is a dharma, or there are dharmas, you can say. So there is the dharma, and there are dharmas which relate to our social, moral, religious obligations. So Mahabharata speaks about both the types of dharma, and it discusses how to reconcile between these two. If there is some kind of contradiction, what path to take so that the contradiction can be avoided. And this has been the problem always, in all the times, that the dharmas come in the way of the dharma. And Bhishma in Shanti Parva, he says, dharmam tu badate dharmo nasa dharmo yadharma tat. A dharma which comes in the way of the dharma. Dharmam tu badate dharma. So that is also dharma and this is also dharma. So but a dharma which comes in the way of the dharma is no more a dharma. It becomes adharma. This is the very clear message in very clear cut words, and both kinds of dharma are juxtaposed together. And if the other one, which imbibes the social, moral, religious duties, so many religious obligations, austerities, rituals, if all they come into the way of the dharma, which is the eternal dharma, or which is the cosmic dharma, then they are no longer dharma. They become adharma. They become sin. We must understand this, and we did not understand this. So all the havoc happens in our society because of that we forget that the dharmas are coming in the way of the dharma. So the message of Mahabharata is not to allow dharmas to come in the way of the dharma. When Krishna says in Gita, Sarva Dharman Parityajya, Mamekam Sharanam Vraja, perhaps he is pointing out that you can leave aside all these dharmas. They are small things. You shun them. It doesn't matter if you are observing them or you are not observing them. Only thing is you do them. You observe them. It's all right. For your satisfaction, for your moral, social obligations, for your family, for your society, for your political obligations, you do all this. But don't allow them to come in the way of the dharma. And what is that dharma? Then he says, Anushansyam paro dharma. Param dharma is anushansya. Compassion to all and a spirit never to harm anybody, never to make any injury to anybody. With this kind of feeling and spirit, if that is there, then dharma is there, the dharma is there. And you do all other kinds of things, your duties, your legal, moral and social duties you can do. So in support of, since Mahabharata gives so many drishtantas, you see there was a sect, Darshtantic sect, developed under Buddhism, and Yoga Vasishtha is one of the great philosophical texts which develops the discourses on the basis of drishtantas. So the technique of philosophical discourse in the Mahabharata is drishtanta technique. So it gives so many illustrations, stories to illustrate a point of view. So Bhishma cites, gives a story to illustrate this point. There was a Brahmin. So this story is told in the 8th Parvan of the Mahabharata, 49th chapter. So there was a Satyavadi Brahman. He had taken a vow never to tell a lie. And once he was going on his way and some robbers were chasing some pilgrims. And those pilgrims, when that Satyavadi Brahmana was looking, they hid themselves in a grove. And the robbers came chasing them. They asked this Satyavadi Brahman, did you see some persons running? And where have they gone? Tell us the truth. So Satyavadi Brahman never tells a lie. So he told them they are hiding in the grove. So that Satyavadi Brahmana went to hell. And since he had never spoken a lie in his life, he asked Yamaraja, why I am here in this hell? What I am doing here? I have never spoken a lie. I am a Dharma Purusha. So Yamaraja told him that you have committed a great sin because of you. Those honest pilgrims, those poor people, they were killed. They were butchered by those robbers. And you could have kept quiet, or you could have told a lie there to save the dharma. So if we do not save the dharma or these dharmas, that Bhishma, who is telling all these things, he himself violated his very message in his own life several times. You see, he could have shunned the small things, but he did not do that. But at the fag end of life, he is telling all these things. He is realizing that he has committed a mistake. So this is what Mahabharata is, that a human being, he ultimately realizes that he couldn't perform the dharma because of various dharmas, the other dharmas. So a very beautiful story, which is one of the most beautiful stories from our classics, that Yudhishthira is performing Ashwamedh Yajna after the Mahabharata war, and a mongoose Nakula, Nevla, comes crawling after the yajna ceremony is over, and he just tosses around. He tries to besmear himself in the remains of the Havishya, the Purodasha that is lying scattered around the Yajna. And desperately he then tells the people over there that all this ceremony, all this dharma which you have done is nothing before a handful of grains given by a hungry Brahman to his guest. So they ask him, why do you say? This is Dharmaraja. He has done great religious duties and he has performed the greatest of yajnas. So then he tells this story, which is a well-known story, that during the days of famine, there was a Brahman family which couldn't get food to eat for so many days. They were dying out of hunger, and one day they got a handful of grains. They prepared their food, and just at the juncture when they were going to have their lunch, a guest arrived. He was very hungry. He was also dying out of food. So these were the days of famine. So he asked them, give me something to eat. So the Grahastha, the elderly man in the family, he gave him his share, but he was not satisfied. So then his son gave him his share. Then his daughter-in-law gave her share, and then the mother also, she gave her share. And this Mangush says that some of the grains of that food were lying on the ground. I came out of my shelter and was roaming around that place, and I found that half of my body became golden because those grains touched my body. After that, I go everywhere wherever there is a religious ceremony, and I try to besmear my body with the remains of that ceremony. And I am disappointed that no ceremony, no religious ceremony can equal to the sacrifice which that poor Brahman family did to save their guest. So the message from Mahabharata is about the compassion to your fellow men, about saving the humanity. You may care for the small things, the dharmas, about the religious duties, about moral and social obligations, but don't forget the wider issues that the dharma talks about. So there are so many other stories. I will not go through them. And Mahabharata shows that a human being has an inclination, a natural inclination to that dharma, to the dharma. He may be a very bad person. He may be a cruel person. He may be willing to have his revenge. But inside of him, there is a soul which tells him that there is the dharma somewhere. You have to save that dharma, so that if you save that dharma, you will be saved. Otherwise, you will destroy yourself and you will destroy humanity as well. So we find that Bhima is very revengeful for Duryodhana. He is a very ferocious character. He is always angry, and he always talks of taking a revenge. He has taken a vow that I will break the thighs of Duryodhana and I will tear the chest of Dushasana and drink his blood. All these cruel things he does also. But then inside Bhima, there is a man who talks of the dharma. And we find that man revealing himself on so many occasions. I just would cite one occasion. Krishna is going as a Shanti Duta, as a messenger of peace. His last desperate attempt to avoid war. You see, it is said that Mahabharata talks of war. Mahabharata is a description of war. It is a poem of Veer Rasa and Rodra Rasa. Horrors of war it describes. But it equally describes the attempts to avoid war. Throughout, from beginning till end, till Bhishma Parva, we can say, the attempts to avoid, to stop war are going on the part of Yudhishthira, on the part of Krishna, and others also. Vyasa also interferes in the Mahabharata. He is a character of Mahabharata, and he tries to stop the war between the Kauravas and Pandavas. So it is not just a text dealing with war. It is a text about the horrors of war and to save the humanity from those horrors and how to avoid that war, the attempts to avoid that war. So Krishna makes the last desperate attempt and goes as a messenger of peace to Duryodhana. When Krishna is going, Bhima comes to him. In isolation they meet, and Bhima makes an appeal to him. Very surprisingly, Bhima tells Krishna that Krishna, you try somehow to avoid this war. This will be a disaster if this war happens. So go and somehow try to bring those Kauravas to their senses so that they do not fight with us. So Krishna is very much surprised. He says that you, of all the Pandavas, you are talking about peace now, when the war has become almost unavoidable. And at this juncture, you are talking of peace and making an appeal to me that I should make all the attempts to avoid this war. So Bhima says, yes, I really do not want this war. I am talking of revenge always. By nature, I am like that, but inside me, there is somebody who tells that this war at any cost should be avoided. So really, inside of Bhima, there was a man telling him what dharma is. So at any cost, an attempt to avoid war is the dharma. And to fight war if it becomes unavoidable is a dharma as well. So we have to reconcile between these two. If it becomes unavoidable, then you have to fight. As Krishna tells Arjuna, that ultimately now you have to fight. We have made all the attempts to avoid the war, but we couldn't avoid it. So there is no other course. When there is no other course, you have to follow your dharma, but not always at the cost of the dharma. So now coming to the question as to how to reconcile between these two. Sometimes they appear as polarities, sometimes they appear as two extremes. The larger issues of life, which we call the dharma, and these smaller things, the rites, the rituals, and the duties, social and moral obligations. So the Mahabharata, in great details, it describes all these types of dharmas. It is a Dharma Shastra text also, and it is a discourse on the dharma also. So it describes the Desha dharmas, Gram dharmas, Kul dharmas, all these things it describes. And every time it says that Anushansyam Paro Dharma. Along with this, Anushansya should not be violated. Compassion and care for the well-being of the society, for your fellow men, this should not be overruled. So Bhishma is discussing Raj Dharma in this Anushasana Parva, and he's telling Yudhishthira what an ideal king is, how an ideal king should perform his duties. And we all know, all the Dharma Shastras tell us that every king should treat his subjects like his own progeny. In Sanskrit, because Sanskrit is a very rich language in terms of its vocabulary, and the words denote several shades of meaning. So the word praja comes for subjects, and the word praja also means progeny or children. One's own children, they are also called praja. So because a king should treat his subjects as his own children, so the word praja denotes both the meanings, progeny as well as the subjects. So everybody knows that the king should treat his subjects like his own children. But Bhishma goes ahead of it to protect the larger issues or the wider connotation of dharma. He says that it is not sufficient that you treat your subjects like your own children, because you may not have equal anushansya, equal feeling, affection for all of your children. So what a king should do, he should treat his subjects as a pregnant woman treats the baby in her womb. This is a peculiar image. Mahabharata is a great poetry also. So it's a wonderful upma, you see. Bhishma says, Bhavitavyam sada ragya garbhini sah dharmina. A Raja should be like a pregnant woman. And why I'm telling you like that? So a king is not just like a parent. Kalidasa said that Prajanam Vinyadhana Drakshanat Bharnadapi Sapita Pitarastasam Kevalam Janma Hetava. The king Dilipa cared for his subjects, he arranged for their education, for their well-being, so he was the real father, and their parents were only the cause of their birth, only they were only the Janmadatas. So this concept is well known that the king is like a father. But Bhishma says that that is not sufficient, that you father your subjects. You should be like a pregnant woman to them, like a pregnant woman is to her baby within her womb. So yathahi garbhini hitva swam priyam manasonugam garbhasya hitam adhatte tatha ragya pyasanshayam. A would-be mother, she is all the time thinking of the baby within her body. Whatever she does for the baby, you see. The real would-be mother in the tradition, you see. The modern mothers would be drinking wine and doing all sorts of things. They will be going to horror movies as well. But in our tradition, the mothers, as they used to be, so 24 hours they had nothing to do except thinking about the baby, which is there in their embryo. So a king should be like that, thinking about his subjects like the would-be mother. So this is the Anushansya, or the larger dharma which a king should care for that. And how to feel that dharma. So Bhishma says again, or Vyasa says, you may say. So this is the essence of dharma, or the dharma you can say. Shruitam dharma sarvasvam shrutva chaivavadharitam atmana pratikulani paresham na samacharet. This is the dearest stanza from Mahabharata to me, and this is the essence of Mahabharata. Vyasa says that here the essence of dharma, Shruitam dharma sarvasvam shrutva chaivavadharitam, and hear it from me and retain it in your mind. Always contemplate upon it. What is that essence of dharma? Atmana pratikulani. That which is not suitable to you, you should not think and act it to the others also. So all the dichotomy in the society, all the contradictions can be removed if we have this feeling of the dharma, that I should not do and act for the others what I feel unsuitable for me. So whatever is there for me should be for the others. Whatever good is there for me should be given to the others as well. Whatever is bad for me may be bad for the others. So this we have forgotten. This essence we often forget. So we often do not do the same thing to the others which we do for ourselves. We have double standards. So all the double standards arise in individual life, in social life, in national life, because we have these double standards. We have something for ourselves and some other things for the other. So this other one, which becomes hell and which creates a hell for us. So this is the violation of the dharma. And Mahabharata, Vyasa in the Mahabharata text, that you should have a feeling that I should have this idea of having that good for others which is good for me. So how that feeling comes, this is the question or the crux of the problem. So again, because the Shanti Parva deals all these issues, it is you see the culmination of the whole discourse in the Mahabharata. And Bhishma, having erred in his life, so many mistakes he has done. He's a great intellectual. He's the greatest warrior of his times and the greatest philosophers and greatest knowledgeable person of his times. And still, he's confused many times. I don't want to talk about the life of Bhishma. Elsewhere, I have done so many lectures I have delivered about that. And but then he talks really the things which we should consider as dharma. So Bhishma says Yudhishthira comes to him. Yudhishthira is reluctant to accept kingdom. After the Mahabharata war is over, as Yudhishthira, as we know, he is a very withdrawn type of person, and he is away from all these political things also in his life. He is a Dharmaraja. So when the war is over, he is disgusted, and he said that everything is over for me, and why should I accept this kingdom and the kingship? I would go to the forest. Everybody is after him, convincing him that you should observe your duty, your dharmas. So he is sent to Bhishma, and Bhishma preaches him. Bhishma tells him what should be your dharma now. So to illustrate his point that you can maintain the dharma along with the Raj dharmas, he gives an example of Janaka. Janaka is a well-known philosopher in the Upanishads also. Even the Brahmins and the Munis and Rishis approach him for Brahmagyana. He is said to be the great Brahmagyani. And it is said that he has seen the ultimate truth in his life, and he was ruler of Mithila also. He was called Videha. So the example of Janaka is given from Ramayana. So Ramayana is equally a discourse on dharma like Mahabharata, and the character of Ramayana is given as is cited as an instance. So Janaka used to perform Raj dharma along with maintaining the moksha dharma. This is what Bhishma says. And then he cites an instance from the life, a chapter from the life of Janaka. It is a record of one of the greatest debates and discussions in the history of ideas. That is Sulbha Janak Samvada. That is, Bhishma tells about it to Yudhishthira. And he leaves Yudhishthira to make an analysis of it. He leaves upon us also to make an analysis of the whole episode. He doesn't here give his conclusions. Perhaps he wants to suggest that you think about it, what Sulbha is driving at and what Janaka is trying to say. So what happens that a mendicant, a bhikshuni, who is a wanderer and a yogini, she suddenly enters the kingdom of Janaka. She enters the premises, the royal palace of Janaka, and she walks in before him. And then it is said that she enters the body of Janaka through her eyes. I won't cite these stanzas. And Janaka becomes aware of her presence, that the lady which has appeared before him, she is a yogini, and she has forcibly entered in his body. And there is a resistance within him. So he questions her that how dare you do this? You have entered in my body. And I am a Brahmagyani. I have studied Vaisheshik Darshana, and I am maintaining the path of Nishrayasa, the Moksha Marga also. And I am following Karma Yoga also. I am performing my royal duties. So you need not interfere with my life. You have nothing to do. You have no business to come in my life. So why have you come here? This is what he questions. And his language at the end of his dialogues, there's a very lengthy discourse about the Vaisheshika philosophy, about the Sankhya system, and how Janaka learned Sankhya system for 4 months from Panchashikha. Panchashikha is a well-known acharya before Ishwar Krishna, who propounded the Sankhya system of philosophy. So Janaka says that I have learned all these systems from the well-known acharyas, from the authorities, and I have been practicing them in my life. So I have been observing Raj Dharma as well as I am walking on the path of Moksha Dharma also. So you have no business to come, to enter my premises. And he also makes some, you can say some indecent remarks also, that you are a youthful lady, you shouldn't have become a yogini, and you are trying to seduce me through your to the lustful path. You are a lustful woman, showing your body, exhibiting your body, because that yogini was really very beautiful and she was a young woman. So it's a very powerful language. You see the dialogues in the Mahabharata and the language that is used there. There's no time to cite and to explain them in detail. But Sulabha, who is a philosopher, who is a yogini, and since you are having a project on yoga consciousness, so here is an example of that yogini, and she is a woman also. And she, according to Mahabharata, according to Bhishma, she is a historical figure, even though the whole episode is viewed as a symbol, and the metaphor is there, of course, and the entrance in the body of Janaka through Parkaya Pravesh motif. So the yogini makes an attempt to enter the body of Janaka through her consciousness. So all these things are there, and the history is also there, because Mahabharata as a itihasa is a record of the events that have actually happened, and also the philosophical issues involving the metaphors as well. So the whole episode can be interpreted as a historical incident which actually happened, and the incident that has happened within the thinking of Janaka, that he splits himself into two personalities and is questioning himself. So this is also an interpretation. And two of the philosophers of our times who have made a study of this whole episode, Arindam Chakravarti and Mangala Chinchore, of course, both of them have different interpretations of it. And I have my own quite a different interpretation of the whole episode, and I will come to it. So this yogini, he questions all the premises of Janaka, that whatever you are telling about yourself, you are an arrogant person. You claim that you are walking on the moksha marga, but it is not possible. How is it possible that you can combine both these dharmas, both these paths together? They are poles apart. So Raj Dharma, when you are doing Raj Dharma, you are conscious that I am a king and I am doing that. And when you are practicing Sankhya, which is at the stage of Kevalya, only one consciousness remains. So how can you perform royal duties if only one consciousness is there? And you are addressing me in an arrogant way. You are challenging me, and you are seeing me other than you. So how can you see me other than yourself if you have achieved Kevalya according to Sankhya as you claim? In great detail, she makes a threadbare analysis of the whole psyche of Janaka, his inner contradictions she brings about. And she says that you have made unbecoming remarks about me. You have questioned my design. So I have not made any violation. I have not attacked you physically. I have not done anything physical to you. I entered your Sukshma Sharira through my eyes. So I have not done any violation. So I find your consciousness torn between divergent poles. And I am a yogini. If you think that I am not a real historical person, so I will introduce myself that I am a daughter of that so and so Rajarshi, and I have also practiced moksha marga and I am liberated. She also claims liberation. And I am almost disappointed with you. I came to see what a liberated man is. I heard about you, so I came to see, but I am going away. And she walks away abruptly. This is the episode, actually. Arindam Chakravarti, see, very beautifully he has analyzed. I'm sorry, I think running of time, but I would like to go through his interpretation, then Mangala Chinchore's analysis of it, but there's no time to read out. But he says that it's a public debate, and the public debates happening simultaneously within one psyche also. So there are two interlocutors. They are outside and they are inside as well. And the debate ends, there is no conclusion. So because the debate ends abruptly. This is what Arindam says. And when you reach at the end of the episode, Sulbha walks away abruptly and she says that I am going away. I will live in some cemetery, in some Shantagara, and I am leaving you. And she doesn't wait for Janaka's remarks. So Arindam Chakravarti says that it is inconclusive. Mangala Chinchore says that she seems to suggest that Sulabha has really shown the path to Janaka, and she has almost won the debate. I don't think so, because Sulabha has violated the very norms of the debate by walking away abruptly. She is a great debater, no doubt, and this whole episode is a great exposition of the art of debating also, because Sulabha explains the Vada Shastra, the whole Vada Shastra, before any text dealt with it, Nyaya Darshana and Dharmakirti and all others. Perhaps it is the earliest records on the concept of Vada and Samvada. There's no occasion to deal with it. So she's a great scholar, great thinker, great linguist and philosopher and yogini also. But since Janaka had questioned her very premises, and she had replied, she should have waited for Janaka's response again. This is the norm of the debate. But she walks away. So she doesn't give a chance to Janaka to again present his point of view. So the very claims of Janaka, she had questions, very minutely, very subtly, no doubt. On all the philosophical grounds, she has brought out the inner contradictions, but she didn't wait for Janaka to reply again. So this is the violation from Sulabha. So what Bhishma is trying to suggest here, right, as it appears to me, and since he is citing the example of Janaka, so he doesn't give any conclusion that you should accept the path of Sulabha or you accept the path of Janaka. He leaves it up to Yudhishthira, that which is the course to be taken for you, what course you should take. And it is for us to decide our own course of action on the basis of this episode. So does the way of Sulabha appeal to us, or does the way of Janaka appeal to us? Despite the inner contradictions of Janaka's actions and his thinking and his psyche, which are analyzed at length by Sulabha, what is the course better between the two? I think Bhishma suggests to Yudhishthira that Janaka should be your model, because you have to live in the world. So the world of that Sulabha, yogini, is not for you. And I have given the example of Janaka because of that. So in the very previous chapter, Janaka is cited as a Rajarshi and as a Brahmarshi. He is a man who is liberated, and he is an ideal king as well. So because Janaka is being cited as an example, so the message from the whole episode is that you should follow the path of Janaka. There may be problems, there may be questions of contradiction between the moksha dharma and the raja dharma, but you have to resolve them, and you have to be in this world. So this is the message from Mahabharata and from Bhishma also at the fag end of his life. And I think Mahabharata wants to suggest that remaining in the world, you can achieve the dharma and you can observe dharmas also. But you should have the power of discretion. So Janaka perhaps would have replied, if he was given a chance, that I am using my power of discretion. And then he says, he had already questioned that who is more liberated of both of us. He questioned Sulabha that who is more liberated of both of us. Are you more liberated than me, or I am more liberated than you? You have to decide. So then there is a concept of Krama Mukti in the Upanishads. So there is no ultimate liberation, you see, because Mahabharata is a tale of becoming. So human being always evolves through all these turmoils, through all these questionings, and through all these contradictions. But he should use his discretion, his viveka always, and make an attempt to reconcile between these polarities, between the dharma and various dharmas. So this is the message of Mahabharata. I think I should finish here, and thank you all. Thank you very much for giving a chance to me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for that very erudite talk that you have given us on concept of dharma and Mahabharata. You rightly pointed out various ways the text is being interpreted in the contemporary times, in the form of assembly of fragments, as well as from the traditional perspective as a text of dharma, text that preaches dharma, that supports dharma, and you have rightly also elaborated on how dharma is understood or has to be understood in terms of reconciliation of opposites. No?
Yes.
When it comes to reconciliation of opposites or polarities, it could be dharma and adharma, it could be one dharma and another dharma, it could be one's dharma and another's dharma. All these possibilities come into picture, and you have delved on each one of them so well. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. And you also, something that is related to our project, that the concept of how people are to be looked at by the Raja, the king, is well explicated in terms of what Bhishma has said, in terms of looking at the people of the country as a pregnant woman takes care of her baby in the womb, instead of looking at them as the children. This is one very good insight that you have given us from the instance there that Bhishma enumerates. And the discussion on Yogini, Sulabha and Janaka Samvada is very interesting. In fact, we had a feminist discourse on this sometime back in one of the lectures on the same webinar series. Thank you so much for pointing out all this. I request Dr. Geetesh to take over and take the proceedings further. Dr. Geetesh.
Thank you, Professor Bala, and thank you, Professor Tripathi ji. Well, this was very enlightening, giving us a newer perspective to view the text with a different lens. The address of Professor Tripathi ji drew our attention to cultivate an attitude, an aptitude to view, study, as well as analyze Mahabharata from the lens of our tradition, the Indian tradition. Before making a very hasty conclusion that Mahabharata is simply a book on war, one actually has to delve, as he explained, into the inherent meaning attached with each verse in the epic, and understand that it's a textbook on becoming, dealing with polarities of dharma and adharma, while emanating a message of peace, as well as explicating how war can be avoided. How beautifully Sir explained all these points. And that actually reminded me that Veda Vyasa employs the art of narratives throughout the discourse in Mahabharata to make the message of Mahabharata reach all. And Professor Tripathi ji today also, in the same spirit as Veda Vyasa, used the narratives within the main narrative of Mahabharata, shared it with all of us to shed light on how diverse is the very concept of dharma within the realm of the epic. Well, dharma is emerging as concept and a practice of significance more and more in the pandemic times. That's, I think, it's the most apt time for us to reflectively revisit the concept of dharma within the Indian tradition of Mahabharata, as explained by Professor Tripathi ji. Sir, on behalf of whole team of our project, Professor Bala, myself, our research fellows, Ms. Jayashree, Ms. Anmol, and our extended team of consisting of Ms. Megha and Ms. Deepshika, the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, and Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi. I thank you from the bottom of our hearts for sparing time on a Saturday afternoon for us. It's been a real pleasure and honor to have you amongst us. Thank you, sir, and keep guiding us all through. We may approach you. In fact, why should I say we may? We would definitely like to approach you to help us and share your knowledge as far as our project is concerned, so that we can take it to newer heights, as well as reach out many, many more enthusiasts of Mahabharata. So it's a humble attempt of our team to reach out to as many people as possible. And there are times when we do receive requests about coming up with an e-certificate, and we always say this is a platform for learners, and learners need no certificate, because this learning gets etched into our minds for life, for changing our own selves. So thank you for sparing time for all of us. I thank all the participants for consistently coming and attending these webinars, because your presence, your participation really encourages us to move ahead with greater confidence. I request all of you to share our social media handles, share the information to, I mean to say, float it as much as possible amongst your colleagues, your fellow friends, students, scholars, as well as general people who are interested in the study of epic, because this is a book which we are all very passionate about. We want to read it, we want to share it with you, as well as we would like you to participate on a larger platform with us in the coming months. Thank you all, and wish you a wonderful day ahead. Now, before we close the session, I would like to request all of you to switch on your videos so that we can have a group picture. And as always, following the very tradition of our webinar, I request all of you at the end to smile. I'm on page 2. I request the participants to switch on their videos. Page 3 now. Most of you are keeping your videos off, yet we would click the picture here too. I think we are done with the day. Thank you all, and namaskar.
Namaste. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, viewers.